a day that redefined the horrors of war.
We heard rumours that Lusitania was going to be sunk by the Germans, which we thought was quite the most ridiculous thing we'd ever heard.
She became a symbol of man's inhumanity to his fellow man.
There was just this thud and explosion under the water, followed by another one immediately.
And we all knew at once what had happened.
Her demise swept away the innocent and covered up the guilty. The last voyage of the Lusitania.
Shadows and phantoms. A land that knows no limits of time or space. From the dawn of discovery to the nightfall of catastrophe. Journey to a universe of the unexplained, the unforeseen, the unbelievable. A place beyond reality. No question will go unanswered. A place where myth and legend are law, superstition a science. Travel to a world of secrets and mysteries.
It's time for our journey to begin. You say you only did your duty. But at what price? Knowledge surrounds these library walls, and with these instruments, that knowledge can be ours. Those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. Words of wisdom that illuminate the following story about something that happened on a pleasant afternoon in May 1915. It set in motion a chain of events that brought the United States into World War I. It set a precedent for brutality that lives on to this day. But perhaps we can learn from history. Our lesson begins during the long autumn of 1914. Europe burst into flames during August of that year, and as the great powers were hurled into a seemingly endless pit of brutality, England and France were swept into war with Germany. And what the politicians could not prevent, soldiers settled in their own fashion, harnessing technology in new and more effective ways to kill. The new machine gun spat out death to the troops on the ground. The airplane brought death from the sky. Below the ocean's surface, submarines lashed out at any target that presented itself. There were new rules of warfare, and carnage on this scale was inconceivable to many. But as the winter of 1915 passed into spring, the worst was still to come. At the same time that Europe was being turned into a slaughterhouse, the United States were roaring through the new century, the terrible carnage in Europe out of sight and out of mind. America was aloof from the war, and that infuriated the British. Their propaganda portrayed the Huns as barbarians, butchers of the innocent, bent on world domination. The United States sat on the sidelines selling arms to both sides, watching and waiting. But on May 1st, the United States was warned in no uncertain terms that their isolation would soon end. On that day, the German government took an ad in the major New York newspapers. warning that any ship flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction. The warning was ignored, which only compounded the tragedy that began the very day this advertisement appeared.
As we boarded, we were given leaflets to tell us that we were travelling at our own risk, as they were going to sink it. And we took no notice, thinking it was propaganda.
We kind of laughed it off. Didn't take much notice of it, because we thought the speed of the Lusitania, which was 25 knots, would be too fast for the U-boats that time.
The idea of a crack British liner being sunk by a mere German was almost sacrilege. I just finished 5 years of wandering around the world when you walked down a high street of foreign places and stuck your chest out because you were British.
The Lusitania left New York on May 1st, 1915 at 12:30 p.m., 2.5 hours late. Had she left on time, history might be different. Among those on board, Alfred Vanderbilt, multimillionaire en route to a horse show, and Charles Frohman, perhaps Broadway's greatest producer. "1,957 other men, women and children were also on board, including this family with 6 children, the Cromptons from Philadelphia. If anyone took the German warning seriously, then it has escaped historians.
The New York was sailing about the same time as we were, and if anyone wished to leave the Lusitania, they could, and go and sail under the American flag. But no one believed that the Lusitania could sink. Therefore, I don't think I'm sure not one passenger left the boat.
Captain Turner was confident that his ship could outrun and outmaneuver anything at sea, and as the voyage neared completion, his confidence seemed justified. But lurking just off the coast of Ireland, the Lusitania's destiny lay in waiting. The U-20, commanded by Walter Schweiger, and at 2:09 in the afternoon of May 7th, 1915, Schweiger saw something through his periscope that he could scarcely believe. Despite warnings of submarine activity, the Lusitania seemed determined to give the U-20 the best possible target. Even though he was well aware of U-boat activity in the area, Captain Turner ordered the Lusitania to proceed at a constant rate of speed, and even reduced that speed. Rather than zigzagging, he cruised in a straight line, giving the U-20 a perfect shot, and Captain Schweiger took full advantage of that opportunity. The Lusitania presented a perfect target, and it only took one shot. The ship shuddered, but kept steaming forward. There was a second tremendous explosion, and she went down in just 18 minutes. The 1,959 passengers, 1,198 perished. Vanderbilt, Frohman, the entire Crompton family all went down with the ship. Captain Turner survived. Of the 129 children on board, only 34 lived. The world reaction to this atrocity was immediate. Outrage, disgust, shock. America was stunned. It would be impossible for the United States not to choose sides in the years to come. And in April of 1917, a little less than 2 years later, America declared war on Germany. Captain Turner faced inquiries as to his questionable performance. He rode out those trials and was given command of another ship in 1916. That too was torpedoed and sunk. Turner survived again. He retired 3 years later. The Lusitania seemed a closed chapter. Some have charged that the Lusitania was not the virtuous lady she appeared. In fact, some say she was armed and dangerous, and that she was deliberately sacrificed so as to turn the Great War into a world war. The Lusitania sailed into history and controversy that May afternoon. Almost immediately, some people were dissatisfied with the official story, and they posed questions that persist to this day. These questions began almost immediately after the disaster. The German government went on the defensive and made claims that at first seemed ludicrous, and then, as evidence began to surface, more reasonable. They concerned the Lusitania's cargo and the role of the British government. Question number 1. Was the Lusitania carrying munitions? Secondly, what caused the second explosion? And finally, did Captain Turner needlessly endanger the lives of his passengers by his strange course of action? These questions have persisted for years, and theories and theorists abound. An English author, Colin Simpson, has been investigating these charges for many years, and he feels that there's an easy, though controversial, answer to them.
The Lusitania was certainly not a passenger ship. She was carrying munitions, she was carrying troops disguised as civilians, and she was carrying several hundred foreign citizens, including a great many women and children. The prime British priority at the time was to get all they could from the United States, not only in war materials, but persuade the officials concerned, the politicians concerned, to turn a blind eye to their activities, to their smuggling activities. The Lusitania and many other British passenger ships were stuffed with war material, and the Germans understandably got very irritated by this.
They responded by deliberately declaring open war on any ship flying the British flag, but the English stoutly maintained that their warships were clearly marked as such, and that the Germans were in violation of the rules of war.
It was passengers only, no contraband allowed. And the British went to great lengths to stress this point, and the Germans went to great lengths to say, "Oi, that's not true. These ships are floating landmines if anything hits them."
The Lusitania sank in 18 minutes after 2 explosions. The Germans argued that they were justified in sinking her. If the Lusitania was indeed carrying arms, then she was a military target. Some say the catastrophic second explosion was caused by detonated ammunition. The torpedo could not have impacted in a more dangerous area, for allegedly munitions were stored there. But others claim an exploding boiler caused the second tremendous explosion, and that munitions had nothing to do with it. Not every question concerning the Lusitania involves its cargo. Captain Turner's performance has also invited controversy.
I can't see that blame in the sinking Lusitania can be fixed anywhere except upon the bridge at the hatch of the captain, William Turner. He had strong orders beginning at the night before the day the Lusitania was sunk, warning of submarines in the area and reminding him to zigzag past the headlands at full speed. He disobeyed all his orders, so I think the sinking is to be laid entirely at his doorstep. I have wondered whether he even had a small stroke at the time. He didn't seem to really know what he was doing.
Other theorists argue that Turner believed the Lusitania could outrun any submarine, forgetting the fact that his ship was running at slow speed. But Colin Simpson disagrees, and he feels that Turner was made a scapegoat.
Turner was blameless. He was doing his duty. He's been accused of not zigzagging. The instruction to zigzag wasn't issued until after he had left England for New York on his outward voyage. And the British Admiralty backdated the instruction to try and implicate him. The true villains of this affair were all the faceless people who could have stopped what was going on, who could have stopped ammunition being loaded onto passenger ships. They were all people who regarded it as a bit of a game.
The final score of that game may have been 1,198 lives. No one could possibly justify such a loss merely to ship arms. Could there have been a larger issue at stake?
It was primarily to ensure continuity of supplies of munitions in the short term, and in the long term to bring the United States into the war.
If we are to accept the existence of such a monstrous conspiracy, then we must assume that someone orchestrated it. There are those who claim that the guilty escaped justice and became leaders of two of the world's great powers, Britain and the United States. Their friendship united two nations against the growing threat of Nazism. Their personal bond transcended national interests, and together they made history. Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. While the war raged on, Churchill and Roosevelt held similar jobs in their respective countries. Churchill as First Lord of the Admiralty, and Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And each may have been involved in the Lusitania affair.
I've no doubt in my own mind that Churchill and his assistants in the British Admiralty deliberately risked the Lusitania. He saw it as his duty to embroil Germany with the neutral powers, particularly the United States.
According to some theorists, Churchill deliberately risked the Lusitania, hoping to provoke an incident that would bring the United States into the war with Britain.
The great mystery about the Lusitania is the fact that its escort, which would have met it when it arrived off the Irish coast, wasn't there. It had been cancelled on the direct orders of Mr. Churchill. So the master of the Lusitania found himself off the Irish coast in sort of misty, foggy conditions. Churchill, having laid down all his instructions, cancelling the escort and everything else, he then went off for the weekend in Paris and booked into a hotel under the name Spencer, and came back on the Monday morning when it was all over. There's never been a satisfactory explanation for that behaviour, and it went to the grave with him.
Was such a monstrous plot possible? Many historians disagree.
I think Church's role in the sinking of the Lusitania was zilch, nil, nothing. England had no reason at that time to need us as a combatant. Our army was a joke, and our navy left a good deal to be desired. We were much better as a supplier.
Either Churchill was trying to get the Lusitania across the ocean safely with all these munitions, or Churchill was trying to lure the Lusitania to her death so America would come into the war. But I don't see how you can argue both at the same time.
And what about Franklin Roosevelt? Where does he fit in? It has been charged that there were two manifests of the Lusitania's cargo. The real one showed that ammunition was on board. Both of these lists reportedly vanished during the subsequent investigation, but allegedly turned up almost 25 years later when they were given to an avid collector of naval memorabilia. His name? Franklin Roosevelt. History would repeat itself in the beginning of the Second World War. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill worked together to bring the United States into the war against Germany. And on December the 7th, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States would cross that brink and enter into a Second World War. It would be comforting to think that times have changed, that violence against the innocent is a thing of the past. But tragically, history does repeat itself. In 1983, a modern equivalent to the Lusitania disaster took place. And once again, the world could only look on with horror. In the early morning hours of September 1st, 1983, a Korean Airlines jetliner with 269 people vanished. It was shot down by a Soviet fighter, and the men, women, and children aboard were never seen again. World opinion was almost unanimous in condemning this seemingly unprovoked action. Though the Soviet Air Force maintained they fired in self-defense, few accepted that explanation. It seemed to many that the Cold War was in danger of igniting, and KAL 007 had become a rallying cry just like the Lusitania had 68 years before. This time, a world war was averted. This time. The Lusitania and KAL 007 were both sacrificed because of global tensions. Both caused the world to pause and reflect. Perhaps someday, such tragic stories will be obsolete. Your faces still haunt our present. Your memory could save our future.
Secrets and Mysteries presents information based in part on theories and opinions, some of which are controversial. The producer's purpose is not to validate any side of an issue, but through the use of actualities and dramatic recreation, relate a possible answer, but not the only answer, to this material.
According to a recent poll taken in the United States, half of its population believe that the universe is inhabited by other intelligent life. The rest of the world cannot be far behind. The 1950s witnessed a sharp increase in the number of sightings all around the world, and with it, more and more evidence that something unusual was happening in our skies. Even the United States government took notice, beginning an official Air Force investigation called Project Blue Book. Their files soon overflowed with more than 12,000 sightings. These water beasts may well be the most ancient surviving inhabitants of our planet.
Did I see the monster? I don't know, but I do believe that, I obviously saw some things, and nobody's been able to tell me what I saw. So I think I must have seen the monster.
Stonehenge. That place has become a metaphor for the magnificent, the unfathomable, and the mysterious.
I have the feeling that the people who built it had something very strongly in mind, maybe more than the astronomy and the worship. And I wish to goodness I knew what it was, and maybe I never will.
German scientist Werner von Braun is considered to be the architect of America's space program. Von Braun and his team took the technology from the German V-2 rocket, which had been created for destruction, and applied it to the development of the chariots that would take man to new worlds.
There's never been an astronaut who got on a spacecraft, whether it was Mercury, Apollo, or even Shuttle, who didn't fully understand the risk involved and who wasn't willing to take them.
The only voyage of the Titanic was surrounded by bad luck that defies belief. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was as if she was cursed. A curse, some say, began when she was launched.
When it happened, he came back. He said, "It's nothing much. They only struck an iceberg."
This magnificent object is a symbol of genius, of ambition, and of dedication, for it is believed to have taken 30 years to construct. And that construction is not the least of its miracles.
It stands as one of the most prominent monuments for its size and complexity, and also its lack of information about it. To be able to plan and economically accomplish such a large feat for the pharaoh is extraordinary.
This is the mark of Sasquatch, taken from a set of tracks that covered a 5-mile stretch of dense forest. The depth of each print indicates that whatever made it weighed 800 pounds. 800 pounds. And there's other, more dramatic evidence. On a hot afternoon in October, Roger Patterson and a friend were riding through some woods in northern California. Suddenly their horses shied. They looked ahead and saw something squatting by the creek. As the creature ambled away, Patterson took this film that has been analyzed, debated, and contested ever since.